What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be doing a full comparison between the new Samsung Galaxy A51 and the Samsung Galaxy M30S. Now, over the last week or so of covering these new A-series phones, a lot of you guys were quick to point out that the M30S, which actually came out just a couple of months ago, might be an even better value overall. And that's something I'm definitely going to talk about in this video. Also, Samsung did just announce the M31, which will launch during the first week of March. So if you didn't know anything about these M-series devices, and this is sort of your introduction to them, I think you'll not only find this M30S pretty interesting, but you might also want to take a look at the M31 in a couple of weeks as well. And I'll of course be covering that phone on the channel when I get my hands on it. Before we get started, if you're interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, or maybe want to buy one of these devices yourself, I will have links to where you can get these phones down below in the video description at their cheapest prices from places like Amazon and B&H Photo. So check down there so you don't miss out. To kick things off, let's first talk about the pricing and availability of these devices. The new A51 launched just a few weeks ago and has slowly become more and more available both here in the US and internationally. And in the coming weeks, we'll likely see it being sold through some US carriers as well. But you can pick up an unlocked or international version of the A51 right now, starting at around $290. You guys know that I think that's a great price for a device like this. And similarly, the M30S is also priced really competitively as well. Now, this device is technically an international phone, and more specifically was launched mainly in India, but you can actually get an unlocked version of this phone that works with most GSM carriers for around $290 as well. Assuming you're on a network that supports both of these devices, you're looking at phones that retail for nearly the same price, but what you get from each device at that identical price point actually does vary pretty significantly. And there are specs and features that sometimes favor the A51 and other times favor the M30S. First off, let's talk about the design and form factor. At a glance, both of these devices look similar, but there are some notable differences worth considering. When it comes to physical form factor, the body and housing of the actual phones, the dimensions are really close. There's a 0.5 millimeter difference in height and width, but in the hand, they feel pretty close. The main difference you'll feel is actually in the thickness, and there's an important reason for that, which I'll touch on in just a minute. The other big physical difference you'll probably notice right away is in the displays. The A51 offers a 6.5-inch screen, while the M30S packs a slightly smaller 6.4-inch panel. Now, overall, the size difference isn't drastic, obviously. You're not getting significantly more screen real estate. The difference is mainly in the small details. The A51 has slightly smaller bezels all the way around, with a fairly noticeable shrunken lower bezel or chin. The lack of a chin is really where you gain that extra screen size on the A51. The M30S also retains a larger and more prominent teardrop notch at the top for the camera cutout versus the subtle and more modern looking Infinity O cutout on the A51. Now, that change doesn't necessarily affect screen real estate, just more of a personal preference really. But overall, you're getting a slightly taller, slightly larger display and a more even and modern look on the A51 when compared to the M30S. In regards to the display technology, both phones offer really nice looking Super AMOLED panels with slight variations in the aspect ratio, 20:9 for the A51 and 19.5:9 for the M30S, and a small difference in pixel density, 405 pixels per inch for the A51 and 403 for the M30S. That also means varying resolutions, 1080x2400 on the A51 and 1080x2340 on the M30S. But as far as I'm aware, beyond those minor technical specs, the screens themselves aren't drastically different. They're still both 1080p panels with bold colors that look nice and really pop, and they offer a solid viewing angle no matter where you look. The only other thing I came across that was actually different was the peak brightness levels. The A51 can get brighter with auto brightness enabled, but beyond that, you aren't getting an inherently better display by going with one phone over another. Side by side, I personally can't tell a difference in color, clarity, quality, or anything else. and I think that's exactly how it should be. These phones are priced pretty close to one another anyway, like I said, and they did only come out a couple of months apart too. So at least with the screens, you're getting an almost identical viewing experience. One other thing to mention, the A51's display also houses the fingerprint sensor under the glass. Not anything new, as we've seen it on countless devices now, but interestingly enough, the M30S retains a physical fingerprint sensor placed around back. Now, I will say this about the fingerprint sensors, while it may be a matter of preference or convenience as to which you prefer, I found that in the weeks using my A51, that in-display fingerprint sensor, for whatever reason, is not all that great. The fingerprint reader on the M30S has been nothing but consistent, so if you maybe aren't using Face Unlock and want a more reliable and consistent fingerprint sensor, the M30S might make more sense. Taking a look around at the rest of the actual devices, you'll see that most everything else looks the same. You've got your SIM and SD card tray at the top left edge, volume and power buttons similarly placed along the right side, and down below, both phones offer a headphone jack, USB-C port, and one single external speaker. These phones both have sort of a shiny multicolored design, though the M30S is actually a two-color paint gradient, while the A51 has that familiar shiny shimmering rainbow effect. And overall, both of these phones have the same plastic housing and build, so you don't get any better quality going with one phone over the other. Around back, you'll also see a bit different camera setup for these two phones, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we do that, we do need to talk about the specs and internals that power these devices, because this is where you'll see some pretty big differences. First off, if you remember, I mentioned earlier that the M30S was noticeably thicker than the A51. Not significantly, but about a millimeter or so, which you could certainly feel in the hand. And that added thickness mainly has to do with the absolutely massive battery that the M30S packs. The A51 has a pretty respectable 4,000 milliamp capacity battery inside, but the M30S packs a 6,000 milliamp capacity battery. That's a larger battery than even flagship devices offer, and with a 1080p display and relatively mid-range internals, that means that the battery life on this device is ridiculous. We're talking like 2 days and beyond of use on a single charge, depending on how you use your phone. And while the A51 is still respectable, I can last a full day pretty easily, it's just no competition for the M30S. And I think that's really one of the biggest selling points in particular for this device. The battery capacity is just unheard of, and it really allows the M30S to stand out from the pack. Beyond the battery capacity, you might be surprised to find out that the rest of the components powering these phones are actually identical. They both offer Samsung's in-house Exynos 9611 processor. They both have the Mali G72 GPU, and you can configure them with either 4 gigs or 6 gigs of RAM. For storage, there are 64 and 128 gigabyte capacities to choose from with each device, and expandable storage via an SD card, all the same no matter what device you choose. But one important thing to note, the M30S actually offers Universal Flash Storage 2.1, while the A51 for some reason retains UFS 2.0. And I was surprised to see the A51 launch with that older, slower UFS standard. In practice, during normal everyday use, I think for the most part, you'll find that these phones are pretty comparable. The M30S with UFS 2.1 has some advantages in certain situations, obviously, with faster read and write speeds. But one other thing to consider is that the A51 ships with Android 10 and One UI 2, while the M30S is still currently a version behind on both. That kind of means that some of these comparisons aren't quite fair. The optimization might be better on the A51, while apps and animations and load times might vary between the software versions too. But what I'm trying to say is beyond UFS, I don't think either phone has a decisive advantage with speed and performance during day-to-day use. Both phones perform well because they both have the same pretty decent specs. And even when you start to push these phones a bit more, I think most people will find that they can handle almost anything you throw at them. The last big thing I want to go over with these two phones are all those cameras around back. Now, I think the M30S was sort of the device that pushed the limits on camera capabilities for a mid-range device and ultimately influenced what we have now on the A51. But with that being said, the A51 did reclaim the lead for a couple of reasons. First off, the main lenses here are the same. each phone packs a 48 megapixel f2.0 aperture primary shooter. With the wide angle lens, the A51 has the advantage with an updated 12 megapixel lens versus the M30's 8 megapixel hardware. If wide angle pics are your thing, the A51 is obviously going to be the better option. The depth sensing camera is the same on these two phones, the 5 megapixel lens we've seen on a lot of devices now, and the A51 also packs one more additional new lens, a macro lens for super up close photography. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times that I personally don't find the macro lens super useful, so I kind of disregard it in the head-to-head comparison. You may disagree with me on that, and that's fine. It's just my personal opinion. But the important thing to understand is that at least on paper, overall, the A51 and M30S don't differ much at all with the camera capabilities, and on the software side, with the features and shooting modes, everything is also pretty much identical. You aren't necessarily getting anything more by going with one phone over another, and besides a better wide-angle lens, since the rest of the camera hardware and internal specs for pictures and video processing are the same, the results are pretty much the same too. The selfie camera, on the other hand, sees a big change from one phone to the other. There's a 16 megapixel f2.0 aperture front lens hidden in that teardrop notch on the M30S, while on the A51, you get a newer, upgraded 32 megapixel f2.2 camera. And you can also shoot 4K video with the front camera on the A51 while you can't with the M30S. I don't know too many people who would consider selfies as the deciding factor in their phone buying decision, but if that's you, the A51 is the device to go with. So with all those comparisons being made, here are my final thoughts. I like the A51, and I think it's going to be a super popular phone in the coming months when more people can buy it. It has a fresh new design and looks more like a flagship device than the M30S does, in my opinion. However, if the teardrop notch and bottom bezel are both something you can overlook, I think I might prefer the M30S. That crazy huge battery is just not something you see on many other phones at all. And all the rest of the specs and capabilities, aside from a couple differences in the cameras, it's all basically the same. And I don't think the M30S takes bad pictures or videos anyway. It's mostly that massive battery and improved battery life that I think would be the biggest deciding factor for most people. It's a shame the M30S isn't available in more places. I think this phone would be insanely popular in the US, but internationally, if you have the choice, I think I'd go with the M30S myself. But definitely let me know what you guys think. Leave a comment down below and let me know which phone you prefer. I'd love to know your thoughts. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.